It's an anniversary. And I want to talk about something of which Cassandra is like a foremost expert on, Waco, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. But first, check this out. This is mind-blowing. And I wonder if you know this too, Cassandra. Yesterday, the ATF tweeted, "We remember the fallen agents, Conway LeBleu, Special Agent Todd McKeon, Special Agent Robert Williams, Special Agent Steve Willis, who made the ultimate sacrifice trying to execute a search warrant. Learn more. Remember Waco, February 28th, 1993. Now, Cassandra, that tweet triggers you, right?
I am taking deep breaths over here.
Wait.
You reading it got me mad all over again. All right.
Did you know that in 2020, they tweeted the same thing?
Yeah, and I think I flipped out last year.
Yeah, every year.
Oh, wait. And you know the year before that, they tweeted the same thing?
Yep. Yeah, so ever since I made my Twitter account, I think in 2013 or something, every single year on Waco, I've gone into like long thread rant crazy person because I've been obsessed with Waco since I was little. I remember seeing it on the news. I think I was like 8 years old, and it was horrifying.
So break down what happened for everybody who's not super familiar.
Our government murdered our kids, basically. No, what actually happened was the Branch Davidians were living in a compound in Waco, Texas, obviously, and ATF and FBI had just flubbed massively a raid on Ruby Ridge. And they shot a woman who was holding her 10-month-old baby, their 14-year-old son, while trying to like stake out and arrest this guy. And so everybody was really pissed off about it. Everybody was like enraged, and ATF looked bad. FBI looked bad. People were really angry at them. So they were like, let's get a win. Let's go and save these kids from this bad, evil cult. And so David Koresh, the leader of the Branch Davidians, he would jog into town every day. He was close to the local sheriff. The people there were all, easily accessible, friendly with the community. The sheriff loved him. They called him when they were getting raided. But they wanted to make a big spectacle about arresting David Koresh because he had some illegal gun parts. They sold stuff at gun shows. It was, whatever.
Gun control.
Yeah. So U.S. government gun control is really scary. So basically what happened is on February 28th, 1993, they went and they were going to go serve a warrant, but they wanted it to be flashy. They wanted to have a big blowout. And so they invited the local news to come. Well, the local news driver got lost, and he asked a USPS driver how to get to the Mount Caramel, which was the Branch Davidian compound. And that guy happened to be a Branch Davidian. So he warned everybody who was back at the compound that something was going wrong and something weird was happening.
If you don't believe me, look at the videotape. I know you have that tape, he says. I saw you making it across the road.
According to the agency, there were 3 or 4 video cameras pointed at the front door. Could tell you everything that happened at the front door of that building that day. They claim they can't find a single one of them. Every one of those videotapes vanished.
In addition to the missing videotape, the ATF's on-scene activity logs also disappeared. They formed a dynamic entry plan to secure the premises and seize illegal weapons with approximately 100 federal agents and 3 helicopters, which would ultimately cost the lives of 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians. A gunfight broke out that would become the longest shootout in American law enforcement history.
My dad's name is Perry Jones. He was an unarmed man. And you guys just shot through the door and killed him. Thanks a lot.
I remember gun shooting through the windows.
Our room was shot up completely.
Law enforcement agency. We don't fire through walls indiscriminately at people.
I greatly feared that they would come in, they would open that door, and even though I didn't have a gun, it wouldn't matter, that they would shoot me and the kids.
The government tried to say that they could put a gun in everybody's hand at the beginning and during the raid, and that's not true. Most people were unarmed.
So they all got ready, and they didn't come out. And they weren't going to come out. And so ATF breached the top window. There's a very famous video of them going up on a ladder. And a shootout took place inside. Some members of the ATF were killed.
I don't think the deaths on either side were justified. As well as those wounded, Judy Snyder was shot while nursing her baby through the chest.
Get my battery, John. Get my battery behind the bus.
And they retreated, and a standoff ensued for 51 days where they were torturing the people inside. There were, I think, 27 women, 25 children who died.
They are headed back to the house, so this thing is not over by a long shot, and the only way that this is going to end is for all of the people inside to die or to surrender, Brad.
For 51 days, they tortured these people. They would play sounds of rabbits being slaughtered, which is a horrific sound, like really loud through the speakers. They wouldn't give them milk. They turned off the electricity. There were a lot of babies in there, and they couldn't eat, so they made a deal to give them milk, but then they put like recording devices in it. It was just really bad. They did things there that would be considered a war crime if we did it in another nation.
Get that camera out of here! Get out of here! Get that shit out of here! Out there!
On March the 1st, the FBI begins negotiations with the Davidians. Heavy military equipment is brought in, and a stalemate begins that will last 51 days. Several adults and children leave Mount Carmel and are transferred to ATF custody. The children are turned over to Texas Social Services.
We have 21 children that have been released to our care thus far. The youngest of those children is 5 months old, and the oldest one is a 12-year-old. The children appear to be smart and well-educated, very sharp children. They seem to have been very well cared for.
By March 24th, 25 children under the age of 15 and approximately 54 adults remain inside the church compound as Steve Schneider negotiates with the FBI.
Let's reflect on this for a minute. Why were they there in the first instance?
A good question.
They were there to serve and execute an arrest and search warrant.
They never said anything, not by a bullhorn, not by a knock at the door, not by any reason. Not by any reason. Even before they got, just about the time they got to the porch is when David opened the door and poked his head out.
What we want to do and what we will do when the time is right is we will process the crime scene there. You know that. We know that.
That wouldn't be so bad. The biggest issue that I've raised with you, Dick, is not that you would be here even, or that the Texas Rangers, but I'm adamant about this part that the ATF is playing. The ones that came to this place, and when I've heard on the press conference the outright lies, and to think that that agency would be involved in any aspect of this from here on out blows my mind that that would even be allowed in America.
Well, Steve, let's face it. There are some things that we will deal with when the time is right.
No. You start dealing with it now so we can come out. I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons I have not been able to hurdle talking to the people, getting them to come out, Dick.
Okay, Steve, why don't you and your family come out and then you handle these issues, okay? Why don't we do that?
How am I going to handle them when I'll be shackled for hands and feet and throwing the key will be thrown away? Who's going to hear me? They're after blood. Come on, Dick.
And then ultimately in April, it culminated with a CS gas attack. They went and they told Janet Reno that they believed that David Koresh was beating babies and raping babies, none of which was true. He had married a 14-year-old, but that was legal in Texas at the time. I personally disagree with that, as most people would, but it was legal. And so none of this was true. They admitted like 5 months after the siege that this wasn't true. But because they told her that babies were being like beaten, she was like, okay, go in with CS gas. And the FBI, the few sympathetic negotiators were like, they're not going to have gas masks for kids.
There
was an aura there that we're going to end this thing.
The CS gas used at Mount Carmel was more potent than normal tear gas. CS gas would induce nausea, vomiting, and disorientation. As the FBI tanks demolished the building, the gas was dispersed from high-pressure bottles mounted on the boom of the combat engineering vehicles.
Any indication about danger or harm to those children, the rule was back off.
One of the first locations gassed by the FBI is the buried school bus, the entryway to an underground storm shelter. Following the gassing, the mothers of the children take them to an enclosed concrete vault, which the FBI calls the bunker. The FBI gasses the bunker for 2 hours.
Approximately half of a panel that we had testified that some of the infants and children, since they didn't have gas masks, could in fact have died from inhalation or effects of CS gas. At the very least, a Department of Justice decision in fact resulted in the babies and children being tortured for at least 3 to 4 hours.
And, you know, the FBI were like, well, they'll have to come out faster then. So on the final day, they started piercing the building with tanks and shooting CS gas in, which by this point the government knew was flammable. We had seen the MOVE bombing and several other raids that ended up turning buildings into bombs because you're putting gas into a building and breaking it apart.
Any statement by you that they committed suicide, since we never got to talk to them, is all a conclusion that you've drawn, and as you just said, speculation on your part.
I'm trying to resolve in my mind why someone would sit in there for 6 hours with gas and not come out with a full opportunity to come out. Well, who was keeping them from doing it? Are they compelling themselves or what? I don't know. It has to be speculation.
I think that's the point, is we don't know.
I don't know who started the fire or fires. I don't know who fired bullets into these people's bodies. I don't know from what origin the bullets came from. So if we could completely agree that we do not have a definitive answer of the sourcing, then in fact what we have is an open homicide. I mean, you have, in essence, a crime scene that was so seriously flawed through ignorance or through an air of an elite mentality, or in fact, there was a conscious decision made to not collect evidence for any sort of serious examination other than to try and prove that the Davidians had weaponry and firepower enough to kill federal agents. Some of these bodies exhibited characteristics of perhaps being shot. Did anyone fire from any other location?
According to the FBI's on-site activity log, at 9:03 a.m., FBI command advised Sierra 2 that an unknown subject could be seen traveling on foot at the back of the building. In this aerial photo, taken at approximately 9 a.m., a Davidian appears to be leaving the building and walking toward the back of the compound. The log indicates that Falcon 2, an FBI helicopter, took off to intercept the subject. As it approaches Mount Carmel, several flashes can be seen coming from the side of the helicopter. Dr. Edward Allard, a former supervising scientist in video and television imagery, at the U.S. government's Night Vision Directorate examined the helicopter footage and concludes that the flashes are gunfire.
When we analyze these flashes, as we have done, in 1/60th of a second time frames, it appears that there's 3 shots coming from the helicopter, but in fact, each one of those 3 shots can be broken down into 1/60th time frames, 60th of a second, and we find, for instance, in the first flash, there's 5 separate shots being fired. And it's indicative of a machine gun that's firing at about 600 rounds per minute.
In this view of one of the FBI's helicopters, a pedestal-mounted machine gun can be clearly seen in the doorway.
FBI agents did not return any fire throughout the entire day, in spite of being fired upon numerous times by occupants of the compound.
On the other hand, since this is on a helicopter, and people might say that it's reflections from the windshield, it's impossible for these shots that you're seeing with your own eyes to be solar reflections, because if it were so, the helicopter would have to be violently moving back and forth like a mirror in your hands, and this is impossible. So it's in our opinion, it's clearly machine gun fire from the helicopter.
In coming out, the conversation, as I remember it, was, well, if we come out, will we be shot?
According to the autopsy reports, Philip Henry was shot several times in the chest, shoulder, and head. Jimmy Riddle was shot once in the forehead. Neither of them had soot accumulation in their trachea or bronchial tubes or carbon monoxide in their blood, indicating that they died before the fire started.
Later, when I saw the autopsy report and seen that he died of a gunshot wound to the head, it made me wonder if it was in fact the snipers that were in the barn garage that was in the back of the property.
The autopsy reports also indicated extensive body mutilation to Philip Henry and Jimmy Riddle. The entire right side of Riddle's body from the shoulder to the hip had been torn away. In previous testimony, Dr. Nizam Pirwani, the medical examiner, observed that this could have been the result of the collapse of the building or an encounter with a tank tread.
What we have here is a tank infantry type of an operation. As the tank moves forward, 2 men have dropped out of the escape hatch. They roll over, and as they roll over, they open up with automatic gunfire. We've measured the actual time of the individual flashes, and they occur at a fraction of a second, in some cases, a 30th of a second. There is absolutely nothing in nature that can cause thermal flashes to occur in a 30th of a second.
Somebody related or who had prepared a film or analyzed a film, representatives of the department and representatives of the FBI went over it in detail and concluded that there was no basis for suggesting that shots had been fired.
As the tank crushes the roof of the gymnasium, gunfire can be seen streaming into the dining room from positions in the courtyard.
I stopped counting after about 62 individual shots.
Interviewed on NBC's Meet the Press on May 4, 1997, FBI Director Louis Freeh stated that no shots were fired by any federal agents outside of the compound. By comparison, this Department of Defense FLIR video, taken in Somalia in October of 1993 as troops exit a helicopter, shows gunfire similar to the thermal signature on the FLIR videotape at Waco. A former analyst from the U.S. intelligence community, Maurice Cox, tested the FBI's claim, applying the principles of solar geometry. For an aircraft flying at an altitude of 9,000 feet, a flash anomaly occurring on the ground would be visible in an area only 100 feet wide. Frame-by-frame measurements of the FLIR videotape showed a repetition of 10 flashes per second, the same rate as a machine gun firing at 600 rounds per minute. According to the Sunlight Reflections Report, in order to duplicate these multiple flashes, the reflective surfaces would have to be exactly the same shape and size and positioned in an array too precise to occur by chance. To record sunlight reflections at 10 flashes per second, the FBI's small aircraft would have had to travel at Mach 1.8, nearly twice the speed of sound. The sun reflection report concluded that the flash signatures on the Waco FLIR video could only have been caused by gunfire. In January 1999, Mr. Cox challenged Director Free and Bureau scientists to disprove his findings. They did not respond.
If someone comes to me to understand the data, I need to tell them the uncertainty associated with it. If the government is only telling them, this was not a field of fire, well, the government is refusing to look at this, and anybody with their plain eyes could see, well, something's going on there.
You know, when you think of the fact they're shooting automatic weapons fire into a building with children in it, there's something wrong.
Dr. Allard has stated that this video shows gunfire being directed into Mount Carmel from the outside of Mount Carmel on April 19th. The only people that could have come from would have been federal agents.
Other flashes can be detected on the FLIR tape within an hour of the fire, such as this detonation in the courtyard, which has a thermal signature that is consistent with a hand grenade exploding. And more gunfire can be seen near this tank. But if the FBI's claim is true, and the hostage rescue team didn't fire at Branch Davidians, then there is another possibility.
According to what we saw written in the Book of Nahum, we were to undergo a military-style attack. We were to be attacked by tanks and people from the military.
The FBI claimed that it never used pyrotechnic CS rounds, munitions capable of starting a fire. However, in this footage made prior to the fire, two agents are seen firing projectiles from an M79 grenade launcher into the storm shelter at the north end of the building. Seconds later, white smoke pours from the shelter. According to CS expert Colonel Rex Applegate, any tear gas that creates smoke is considered pyrotechnic.
There's been some unfortunate reporting talking about that if tear gas were utilized, it would deprive the children of oxygen and it perhaps could be fatal. What they were describing is not the type of tear gas that we are using. We're using a non-pyrotechnic type tear gas, which does not deprive them of oxygen, so it is not a lethal type gas.
This is a U.S. military Mark 651 CS projectile, recovered in the aftermath of the Mount Carmel fire. It is pyrotechnic and has a burning time of 25 to 30 seconds. It generates a distinctive cloud of white smoke.
I am very, very troubled by the information I received this week suggesting that pyrotechnic devices may have been used in the early morning hours on April the 19th, 1993 at Waco. At this time, all available indications are that the devices were not directed at the main wooden compound, were discharged several hours before the fire started, and were not the cause of the fire.
In the fall of 1998, unprecedented access to the Waco evidence lockers was granted. The pyrotechnic projectiles identified in the crime scene photos were missing from the evidence boxes. However, 2 additional 40mm munitions were found. These devices are identified by the manufacturer's literature as pyrotechnic rounds. They were found in the rubble behind the compound. These munitions were examined, and the preliminary results indicated these devices may have passed through the wood structure.
And they didn't have the fire department there, so the building caught fire. There's a debate if it was the ATF that started the fire or if it was the Branch Davidians, but either way, they did not have the fire department there to stop it. And so the women and children went and hid in a half-buried bus. And because the tanks were knocking down the building, the door to get out got barricaded. And so they shot tear gas into where the women and children were, and they died. They suffocated. The whole building went up in an inferno.
And what we have is we have men firing automatic weapons, and they're firing into the burning building. And like some sort of a cowboy movie, they're retreating down the building and firing as they're retreating. I cannot remember something more sickening that I had to do to witness this.
According to the Justice Department report, at least 15 people were found shot to death at this location. The FBI conducted ballistic tests, which the Justice Department later termed inconclusive and rudimentary at best.
Whether or not you argue that some people committed suicide, yes, that may be, but I would say the majority of the people, the bodies that I saw, were clear-cut homicide victims.
Only a few people made it out. It's one of the greatest American tragedies, in my opinion.
That's heinous.
Sorry,
And
that was really long.
No, that's
and
great.
I'm sure there's a whole bunch. That was the quick version. That was a few minutes.
Yeah.
And then every year, the ATF on Twitter commemorates the fallen servicemen over what was probably one of the most horrific atrocities.
And
in
they
American
never
history.
say anything about the women or children or men who were killed in there. But you know what the Branch Davidians do? Every year they have a memorial at Mount Carmel, and they also remember the ATF who died.
Wow.
Along with their own people. The ATF doesn't do that.
I mean, I feel for the ATF, the families of these men who lost their lives.
Sure.
But we clearly know who was in the wrong on this one.
Yeah.